He's too handsome.
Yeah, like
That's a
like your.
that's
your
a
forehead's
problem
like
when
kind
you're
of
an
like
ARPG dev.
Yeah,
I wasn't aware.
He's
Yeah.
too handsome.
it looks good. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm here with Chris from the GGG team, and we're talking PoE 2 today. I'm really excited to be here at PAX West, and just ask some more detailed questions for everybody out there in the MAXROLL community, because we've seen a lot from you guys over at Gamescom, and I think a lot of folks have some super detailed questions. So let me start out. So last year we were here, and we asked a lot of questions around qual versus quant, right? And the vibe I got a year ago was, well, we don't want to drop as much loot because we don't want to make it a hard requirement for people to have a loot filter. And we want to do some things in the game to make it a little easier to get the loot and to start experimenting a little earlier with crafting. And I was getting that sort of vibe. And so I played the demo a little bit earlier, and I saw it's way more up to date. I felt way better about it. And one of the things I noticed was now these uncut skill gems will drop. Can you tell me a little bit more about how the uncut skill gems, like how that's evolved, especially in relation to this philosophy of wanting to maybe drop a little bit less loot that's more understandable to the player?
Well, the uncut skill gems allow us to, on that front at least, of minimizing loot drops and minimizing item bloat, they allow us to drop fewer gems because players can choose which ones they want when they show up. So like if you're specifically looking for a given gem or support gem or whatever, you don't have to drop 50 of them to make sure that the player gets the one they need. You can drop 5 and then they'll get the 5 they want, that sort of thing. And then additionally, one of the other changes, which is sort of tangential but is worth noting because it's a relatively recent one between the demos that if you were here at PAX West wasn't the case last year, is that skill gems actually no longer gain XP with the player. I think I just may have moved the camera a little bit there.
It's fine.
But skill gems no longer will gain XP with the player. Instead, you will level them up by, when you drop an uncut gem, the uncut gem will have a given level, and you can use it to either generate a new skill gem at that level or level up one of your existing skill gems to that level. So you drop like a level 7 uncut gem and you have a level 5 Ice Nova, you can use it to make the Ice Nova level 7 instead of XP being gained on the gem as you level.
So in other words, instead of needing to go and grind out a bunch of mobs, if you just got a new skill gem where you're basically starting from zero, like I just got grenades for my mercenary or whatever, right? So instead of starting from zero, now your uncut skill gem lets you kind of jump forward to the place where your character kind of is. Because I noticed the uncut skill gems were dropping somewhat level appropriately, right?
Yeah, I mean, they'll drop. There's one of the other changes in PoE 2 that's maybe getting into the weeds a little bit is, so in PoE 1, skill gems have extremely variable XP curves, where like there'll be skills that you get and they start, the level 1 of, say, I may be misremembering here, but the level 1 of, say, Ball Lightning requires like level 26 or level 28 or something, whereas, a level 1 Burning Arrow requires character level 1. In PoE 2, a level 2 skill gem has the same level requirement for any of the skill gems.
Oh, okay.
It's just some of them have a minimum level of generation, if that makes sense. So like you cannot generate Frost Wall below spell gem or skill gem level 7 or skill gem level 6. But in theory, if you had a Frost Wall that was level 2, it would have the same level requirement as a Fireball at level 2. And it just simplifies things quite a bit, both on our side and on the player side. And it does mean that like exactly like an uncut that drops at a given level will generate skill gems appropriate for that level consistently.
And it still felt relatively, actually maybe more exciting to get an uncut skill gem drop because you knew there was some new skill or something that you could go explore, right?
Yeah. And even if you don't have a choice that you want to go for your current class, you can just leave it in the uncut form and then use it later for another.
Oh, just like drop it
character.
in your stash, and then your alts can use that as they're leveling up.
Yeah.
Okay, very cool. The other thing I noticed is when you go to cut the gem, there's a, what's it called, engraving. So now, instead of going to Lily Roth and being like, hey, there's 300 gems here, which one do I pick? There's this sort of card pick list.
Yes.
That's very nice and tells you, you know, which weapon am I using? Well, you can choose one of these 5 options kind of thing. Can you tell me a little bit more about the design behind that and what that's doing for the player, and or if that is limiting potential options for players that might feel like, I really like Lily Roth, I like my 300 options?
Well, you don't have fewer options.
Okay.
Because when you open up the uncut menu, it is sorted by weapon type, and it's sorted by like what, you know, you click the mace one, you get all the skill gems that can be used with the mace. But you could go and click the bow one and cut a bow gem if you wanted to. Like, you are allowed to cut things outside of your class, so to speak, or outside of the restrictions of your currently equipped weapons. It's just by displaying it in such a way that it defaults to the things you're most likely to want and you're most likely to be able to use in whatever your current situation is, it makes it much easier for newer players and for players who just want to, you know, have the game sort of lead them in the right direction while not really sacrificing any of the choice that Path of Exile is really, you know, built on. The bedrock of the game is that player freedom. So like, you can, if you're an experienced player and you know you want to do something wacky and, you know, cut some weird gem that you wouldn't normally use in your class, that option is still absolutely there. It's just an option that you kind of have to know to seek out. And the kind of player who wants to do that is someone who's going to know to go seek that out. Whereas the kind of player who doesn't necessarily need 300 options thrown in their face straight away and would rather have a pared down list to what's most likely to be applicable to them now gets that. And it's part of just a broader push for PoE 2 to be better at onboarding people without sacrificing the depth that makes Path of Exile what it is.
That's really relieving to hear that there's not like, it's not like hardlining you towards this path and then opening up later. You can really, you know, if you really want to, you can go into the weeds as a mercenary to go cut a mace gem if you really want to for some reason.
And in a similar thing with the support gems, because there's uncut versions of support gems, and any skill that you have will be listed in that menu, and you can click it, and it'll show like 9 support gems that it recommends at various tiers. But then there's a button at the bottom for all gems, and you just click that and it shows everything, and you can cut whatever you want.
That's awesome.
So again, like, the player who wants to do something weird and has a plan for some off-meta thing they want to do, all of the options are still there. Like, you can go, you know, you can cut whatever you want out of any gem menu. You know, the passive tree still works the same in that every class starts in the same tree and you can path wherever. So you can still do off-meta strange stuff that breaks the game and makes our job hard as developers. But we've just made it so that the presentation of what's there isn't just everything all at once, you know?
Right.
It's like how in a restaurant, instead of a menu just being, you know, 500 list of things in no particular order, we've now cut it down and there's a subsection of like, here's you know, your starters and here's your mains and all that.
So I have some questions from the MAXROLL team as well.
Sure.
So if you can tell us, which crafting systems from PoE 1 are you incorporating in PoE 2?
I feel like I may have to disappoint on a number of these questions.
Okay, yeah.
So in particular, things like, you know, secondary crafting systems, which I guess I would define as things like fossils or essences, you know, things other than your core currencies like alchemies and transmutes. Those are the kinds of things that will be determined on a case-by-case basis, likely over the course of the early access that we're starting in November 15th.
Gotcha.
So I really can't answer that specifically yet because we haven't determined some of those yet.
I think that's a pretty reasonable approach though, right? Like it seems like the approach to the game in general is, you know, we have this league mechanic, we've never done something like this before, let's try doing this, and then let's try to learn from that, and then based on what we learn from that, let's incorporate something. So that seems like a very reasonable approach, right?
Yeah. I would say that, like, broadly speaking, the structure of the league mechanic, the release schedule of the league mechanics is very efficient in that it both gives players a new exciting thing to come back to and gives us room to develop new ideas for the game.
So in that sense, from the early access, are you specifically looking to seek out sort of like the problems that players are having, and then look at the world of crafting mechanics that you have, and then seeing which puzzle piece kind of fits those problem sets, like essences, for example, or fossils or whatever?
Yeah, and then there's also like, some broader design philosophy things that in PoE 2 we might be shifting towards, and then League mechanics that were designed for PoE 1, which is a different game at this point, will need to be shifted around that and change in ways that I can't really speak to yet, because it's the kind of thing that needs to be determined in active development.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I could theory craft about, like, for example, the game feels like, I was playing Mercenary earlier. I'm level 15, right? So it's not end game. But one thing that felt very different to me was, instead of feeling the need to blitz through the map as fast as possible, I would sort of stop my own progress when I got a big enough pack of enemies, because the danger became too great to try to push forward. And then I actually really appreciated having like these things that normally would get in my way, like pillars or doorways or other things like that. Whereas in PoE 1, I would see, a doorway or a pillar, and I'm like, oh, well, my shield charge, I'm blapping against the wall here. That's really annoying. I don't like that in the map. Whereas in this, it was a great way to sort of like group enemies together and then throw grenades down and blow them all up together.
Yeah.
So I can imagine that since since the pacing is very different, then something like, say, like Delirium might play very differently in PoE 2 as PoE 1, right?
Yeah. Basically, every League mechanic is going to need to be, we've put a lot of design time and a lot of effort into pretty much every League mechanic that's ever been made, and we don't like to just cut stuff, so where possible, we're going to try and update these things to make them be worth inclusion in PoE 2. But yeah, it's just going to have to be a case-by-case basis as to what gets in.
Awesome. So there have been some recent changes to monsters, where all the abilities are being kind of treated the same, right?
In PoE 1 or 2?
I believe in PoE 1.
I'll let you finish the question.
Yeah. So what are you doing to rebalance defenses in terms of how you receive damage? Like, for example, evasion and spell suppression only apply to like certain monster abilities, right? So what kind of considerations are you making in PoE 2 in terms of like layers of defenses that might apply to how all monsters do damage everywhere instead of just to certain types?
Well,
maybe a very specific question.
I think having diversification of defenses this may not be an answer that the person asking this was looking for, because you said you fielded these questions.
Yeah.
But I think that diversification of defenses is important in much the same way that diversification of offense is important. Like, you want to have multiple avenues that monsters can be throwing damage your way, so that you can feel rewarded for specialization into something, and so that a build can feel like it, like you ultimately, something like an ARPG like Path of Exile is a whole lot of numbers interacting with each other, right? And so you need to build that illusion through gameplay systems that there is meaningful difference between these numbers and those numbers. And one way to do that is to have both your offenses and your defenses scale off of many different axes. And so I think it's pretty important to have that differentiation and to have, like physical damage, chaos damage, elemental damage as one axis, and then spell damage, attack damage is another, and then maybe damage over time, hit damage is another. So you can specialize in certain ways, because from that specialization comes a sense of having created a build that is meaningfully different to a previous one you played, or to the build your friend is playing or something.
Yeah.
Personally, I think that's quite important.
And I've noticed that, and this was definitely the case last year, and I'm not just, you tell me if it's still the case. but I noticed that sort of like the monster design philosophy in PoE 2 has shifted quite a lot compared to PoE 1, where certain monsters are, big and tall, and you need to use certain attacks with them, maybe like 50x the health, right? Whereas other mobs come in packs and try to swarm you, that sort of thing, right? So I guess what I'm seeing so far in PoE 2 is a lot less of what I call piano key builds, right? Where you're just like slamming your fingers on the keyboard and then hitting your one attack. And instead, you're making an active decision about which attack you want to use, because this mob is resistant to physical, this mob is resistant to fire, this is a very tall mob, so you want something that like breaks its armor, and then after that you switch to another attack that does a lot of damage. Can you tell me a little bit more about like the monster design, or like how you would maybe approach combat in that sense?
Well, as far as the monster design side of things go, I mean, you're absolutely correct that there's more of a push to try and make things feel distinct, and it even goes down to things as subtle as like where possible. So like monster packs, for instance.
Yeah.
The way a pack of monsters is defined is there's a certain number of, like a given pack of monsters, there's a certain variety of monsters that can appear in that pack, and then usually there's like a monster that's designated as the leader, so it's usually like the bigger monster. So you'll get like one of those, maybe two, depending on the composition. And one thing that we like to aim for is usually, say we want to have an average of 3 monsters appearing in a pack. Usually, instead of having 2 to 5 monsters, actually, let's go with the bigger spread. So if we want to have an average of 5 monsters appearing in the pack, usually instead of having an average of 4 to 6, we'll go for a range of like 2 to 8. And it's still the same average appearing, but you'll have more variance pack to pack.
Right.
Because you want to have that differentiation of experience. You want to have that, like, sometimes you run into the pack that has twice as many monsters as the last one you just fought, and it feels more like a different experience, even though as far as monster development time, it's the same monsters that we designed. It just feels a bit different in that one situation. But then on the player side of things, we are absolutely trying to make it so that, like, you care more about having more different tools for different circumstances. Like in PoE 1, if you're playing a ball lightning build, you have one solution to every problem, right?
Right.
The game puts a problem in front of you that is 50 small little monsters. You press the ball lightning button.
And you spam it until you crash the server.
Yeah. Yes. The game puts a problem in front of you, which is one giant Minotaur boss. You press the ball lightning button. Whatever problem the game puts in front of you, you press ball lightning. You maybe press, Sigil of Power, Arcane Cloak alongside it. But usually, as far as active damaging skills, it's ball lightning. Whereas in PoE 2, we want to have tools that feel different enough that they're useful in more circumstances, and so that the player feels encouraged to use more than one tool to solve the problems that we're throwing at them.
And maybe, I think it's maybe too early to talk about in-game, right? Because you guys aren't quite there yet. But maybe at in-game, that equation changes a little bit, because now you're omega powerful, and then you can go into your 1-0 button builds and blow up everything once you have enough power. Or are you looking at also kind of keeping that philosophy going as long as it can?
I think that, and this is speaking somewhat theoretically, but
Yeah,
I think that
theoretical.
it's inevitable that it will somewhat boil down to there being a powerful build out there that only has to use a couple tools in order to solve most problems. But we are going to be generally designing in a way that the player is quite rewarded for, being willing to do setup, payoff, and combo, and, using skills in ways that complement one another. So, like, it could very well be that there's a build that can get through the content in the game with, just the one skill, or maybe one skill and occasionally a second one. But I feel like the strongest build, often with the way we're designing things and the way we're designing skills, is going to be something that uses a plethora of tools.
Okay, final question from the team.
Mm-hmm.
So, recently, y'all introduced the currency exchange market.
Sure.
And I believe there was something mentioned where that was, as you do with League Mechanics, that was introduced as this test of sort of asynchronous trading for PoE 2. Have you learned anything from that, and have you started incorporating any changes into PoE 2 to as a result of what you learned?
So as far as specific changes to PoE 2 for the currency exchange, I can't really speak to that because since League launch, I've been on the road. I went to Gamescom and then traveled here. It'll be a minute till I get back, so I don't really know the specifics, but I imagine the answer to that is yes. I just can't really speak specifically on it. As far as what we've learned from the currency exchange implementation in PoE 1, I think, speaking as the guy who implemented the gold prices, I think it should probably trend towards a limit rather than just being a price that absolutely scales. But maybe we'll see about when I get back. Sorry I don't have more specifics on that for you.
That's fine. And then I guess last question, more of a narrative question.
Sure.
Recently I saw a blog that y'all posted about the founding and settling of Kalgur, right? And kind of how that ties into the narrative 20 years later in PoE 2. And I noticed the thing that was actually most shocking and got most of my attention in the demo that I felt was just excellent was the character creation screen, right? You make your character and everyone is, all the classes are lined up to be hung and killed by this executioner, and you pick your character and that character escapes and all the other classes die.
Yep, you can't save them all.
What I really enjoyed about that is it kind of tells you what you're in for, right?
It does set the tone, yes.
It sets the tone, and as a matter of necessity, just like every other ARPG I've ever seen, you immediately go to the area with zombies where you're just right-clicking to kill one zombie at a time because, you have to introduce the player to, hey, right-click is attack. You have an inventory. You can equip items in this game. The really basic things. But I just really liked how you set the stage for the narrative. What else are you doing to sort of set the stage for the narrative in PoE 2? And maybe even in PoE 1 in terms of now that we have things like Settlers of Kalgur kind of telling us the past, what this future world will be like.
It's a good question. I'm not so sure. So as far as the tie-in between the two games, the only thing I can think of is the fact that, in PoE 2, King's March is one of the towns, which I think was in that post. Even if it wasn't, it's been in a previous demo, so it's not a spoiler.
I saw many boats leaving King's March, so...
there are boats. I can't go into further detail, but there are in fact boats. And I don't know. I think that the world building that's done by this maybe isn't quite a direct answer to your question, but due to my inability to come up with a better one, the world building that's done by the level design team and how little details and stuff, such as so I don't know if you got to it, but in one of the first few zones in Acts 1, one of the first quests you get is to go kill a Devourer, giant worm creature that tries to spit acid on you.
I killed him, yes.
So the zone just before that, if you're paying attention, you can see there's little tracks, and those will lead you to where the lair is. And the level design team just does a great job with all those little details and stuff. And one of them is that much later on in Act 1, you can actually reach the place where you were about to be hanged.
I did that, yeah.
And you can find a poor deceased body hanging there, and you click it and drop some loot. It's great.
Oh, okay, yeah. I fought you fight the executioner. That was a great boss fight, and then
you can reach the exact spot, the zone after the executioner. You can reach the exact spot where you were going to be hanged.
That was really satisfying, right?
Yeah, it is.
And my character, I was playing the mercenary. My character even said he's I didn't even do this one for the money, right? That was great. That was a really good narrative.
Yeah, I think Sorceress says something like, "I should have made you suffer." They're not nice people, the Exiles.
I don't think so. Well, Chris, did you have anything else for us? Anything else you wanted to share?
I mean, I appreciate you coming by the booth and taking the time to talk about the game.
Of course, yeah. Thank you for your time, and I'll see you around.
Yeah.